Well, Superman may not have been a great fit for a dark and gritty universe, but guess what well-established DC character was? The Batman. Yes, a natural fit. He had been dark and gritty before it came in style, although he sort of fluctuated from dark and gritty to campy and back again. By the way, this this artwork here is from a collection of early stories by Norm Brayfogle, who took over as penciler for on Detective Comics in 1987, and later did both Detective and Batman until the mid 90s. One of the defining Batman artists of that time period um, had a stroke in 2014 and was not able to draw anymore, and he had a rough time for the next 4 years until he passed away of a heart attack at the age of 57. I was very fortunate to have been able to get to know Norm Brayfogle in those final years and talk with him quite a bit. And he's a really great guy. Anyway, you want to get dark and gritty with the Batman? Let's start with the dark and gritty Joker. In a graphic novel in 1988 called The Killing Joke by the British creative duo Alan Moore as writer and Brian Bolland as artist. And this was a graphic novel. It was not put together from individual issues of a comic book. It was a self-contained story, a very controversial one, although the controversy grew over time. Initially, it was just regarded as very powerful, very powerful, very dark and gritty. Yes, in this one, the Joker, who is trying to provoke the Batman, kidnaps and tortures Commissioner Gordon, and this is the one where the Joker shoots Barbara Gordon, alias Batgirl, in the groin, thereby permanently paralyzing her. Now, I said this was controversial. The controversy grew as the years passed and more attention was directed to the misogyny of the character, but also the brutality of the portrayal of it. Well, not so dark and mysterious, Robin. Remember, I had talked about the fact that Dick Grayson had become Nightwing. Well, that happened in 1984, and actually, Batman didn't really even wait to get a new teenage sidekick, Robin, Jason Todd. And we'll talk about Jason Todd a little. Well, what the heck? Let's talk about Jason Todd right now. Jason Todd was first introduced as this red-haired street kid that Bruce Wayne takes in and begins training to become his sidekick. And then, Dick Grayson retires the name of Robin, and so Jason Todd dyes his hair black and dons the Robin costume. Well, in 1988, DC ran a contest for publicity, for the sake of publicity. Now, after Crisis on Infinite Earths, the character of Jason Todd, like many characters, was sort of retconned. His background was changed, and some readers found him bland and less interesting after that. But the contest in question is that DC, because some people had complained about the character, DC had this call-in contest. So you had to call in DC and you get charged. I don't remember what it was, like, $1 or whatever. Call in and vote as to whether Robin should live or die. And like I said, it was a publicity stunt. They didn't expect the vote to be overwhelming in favor of killing off Robin, but it was, and so they followed through. In a 4-part story called A Death in the Family, written by Jim Starlin, with pencils by Jim Aparo, one of the preeminent Batman artists. And in this one, the Joker captures and kills Jason Todd, the new Robin. Beats him with a crowbar, beats him to a pulp, as you can see, with a crowbar, and then blows up the building he's in. So the Batman discovers his dead ward there. This was a very powerful story. Jim Starlin's a good writer. Jim Aparo's a great artist, and got a lot of publicity. In fact, most people who didn't follow comics didn't even understand this wasn't the original Robin that had been trailing along behind the Batman for, at that point, 50 years. That it was a relatively new character, but got a lot of attention, and the resale value of those issues just went crazy, went through the roof. Well, you might almost stop and think that this is, in reality, a very realistic take on what would happen if a street vigilante had like a 15-year-old as their sidekick, right? That's the sort of thing that you expect would happen. The Department of Social Services should have gotten involved on this. So, just to kind of, in case you're keeping score here, I'm going to go through this next part just to catch everybody up on Robin. So, Dick Grayson was the original Robin, created in 1940. He was Robin for 44 years until he changed his name to Nightwing. And when he changed his name to Nightwing, actually this was December 1983 when Jason Todd first appeared in costume as Robin. So Jason Todd was Robin for about 4.5 years until he was brutally killed by the Joker. Well, you would think that might teach Batman a lesson, but apparently all those years that he spent as a dark avenger of the night without a colorful sidekick had kind of gotten to him, and so he immediately gets another Robin, this one named Tim Drake. So Tim Drake becomes Robin because he's Robin number 3, because Robin number 1 is now Nightwing, and Robin number 2 is now dead, except he didn't stay dead. Ironically, this is around the same time that Bucky showed back up from the dead. Turns out Jason Todd was dead, but spoiler alert, 20 years after Crisis on Infinite Earths, there's another Crisis miniseries that jumbles things up around again and sort of shifts some stuff around, and as a result, Jason Todd is now alive and is a violent vigilante called the Red Hood. Turns out, for some reason, he has deep psychological trauma from his teenage years. So, now you've got Dick Grayson as Nightwing, Tim Drake as Robin number 3, and Jason Todd, who was Robin number 2, is no longer Robin but is Red Hood. Until Dick Grayson, alias Nightwing, temporarily stops being a superhero, at which point Jason Todd, the Red Hood, alias Robin 2, adopts the identity of Nightwing with a vengeance. He has a much harsher approach to things than Dick Grayson. And shortly after that, Dick Grayson decided, well, no, I didn't retire, and that's my name, and I want it back. And they had to fight over it. But the end result was that Dick Grayson returned to being Nightwing, and Jason Todd, who used to be Robin number 2 and used to be the Red Hood and used to be now Nightwing, then becomes Red Robin. So, Red Robin, Jason Todd, Dick Grayson, though, back to being Nightwing in 2007. Well, for a couple of years, and then Bruce Wayne, alias the Batman, was missing and presumed dead, so Dick Grayson took his place as the Batman. So now Dick Grayson, who used to be Robin #1 and then became Nightwing, now becomes Batman for a while. Anyway, when he takes over as Batman, he doesn't really want Tim Drake as his Robin, so he fires Tim Drake and gets another Robin, Damian Wayne, who is the genetically created offspring of Bruce Wayne the Batman and the daughter of his archenemy Ra's al Ghul. So Damian Wayne now becomes Robin, so Tim Drake is not Robin. So Tim Drake becomes Red Robin because Jason Todd, who used to be Robin and then became the Red Hood, then became Red Robin, but is no longer Red Robin because he became Nightwing, and then Nightwing came back, so he went back to being the Red Hood. So now Tim Drake, Red Robin, and then Bruce Wayne shows back up. He's alive after all, so Batman is once more Batman. Dick Grayson is once more Nightwing, until he stopped being Nightwing again, retired from that and became a spy, and then just went by the name Grayson. But that didn't last. Didn't last a long time. He came back, and Dick Grayson went from being Grayson to once again being Nightwing. So Dick Grayson was originally Robin, but then he became Nightwing, but then he became Grayson, but then he became Nightwing. So now that he is Nightwing, Tim Drake had become Red Robin, and he spent about 10 years as Red Robin, but then he shortened his name just to plain old Drake. So far as I know, as of right now, August of 2020, Bruce Wayne is still the Batman. Dick Grayson is once again Nightwing. Damian Wayne is still Robin. Tim Drake is now Drake. And Jason Todd is the Red Hood. That's how it stands as of right now, but check back next month. Meanwhile, unless I'm wrong, this means the position of Red Robin is open, if you're interested. By the way, I just wanted to let you know, I left a lot of stuff out. Anyway, let's talk about something different. Please, let's talk about Alan Moore. We've mentioned him a couple of times already. Alan Moore, a British writer who got his start writing for the British sci-fi comic anthology series 2000 AD. Also did some writing for Doctor Who Weekly. Then came to the United States and had his really big break on Swamp Thing, which gained him a lot of critical attention and made him a fan favorite. And his run on Swamp Thing was considered to be just exceptional. And from there, he just went on to greater heights. So I have here a list of things that he has written. Miracle Man and Swamp Thing are italicized because they were ongoing comic book series, not miniseries or graphic novels. These other things, this is just the most famous works. But this list is, in addition to being a list of things Alan Moore has worked on, it is a list of some of the best things to come out in comic book form in the last few decades. Classics one and all. Well, because of his popularity, Moore opened the door for other British artists to cross the ocean, and it led to what came to be called the British invasion of comics in the late 80s, and it was more an invasion of DC Comics than anything else initially. So we'll look at three of the other British writers who came over, starting with these two individuals, both of whom are Scottish, and both of whom went to work for DC in 1988. Alan Grant in 1988, with his writing partner John Wagner, also British, took over Detective Comics. And Grant Morrison took over, well, he didn't take over, he started Animal Man, which was kind of a really goofy one-off character that had been introduced in the 60s and no one had ever really done anything with, because what the heck can you do with him? And Morrison made this a really popular book because of his very surreal writing style. That's something that all of these British writers that we're talking about had in common. Very, very deep and complex, and also somewhat surreal. So we got Alan Moore, we got these two Scottish guys, Alan Grant and Grant Morrison. In 1988, Neil Gaiman, we'll take a look at him in a moment, got on board with DC Comics with a miniseries called Black Orchid, which, much like Animal Man, was a superhero character that had been created actually by Sheldon Meyer in like the early 70s, and no one had ever really done much with. And Gaiman and the painter Dave McKean created this beautifully written and painted and beautifully written miniseries, which opened the door for Gaiman, and there he is, around the same age as Grant Morrison, to have the writing assignment for a regular ongoing book. In fact, he was given free rein to put his twist on an old character, the Golden Age character of the Sandman, which he totally, completely, well, not totally, but pretty much ignored. Sandman by Neil Gaiman, which started in 1989 and ran the better part of a decade and won all kinds of awards, all kinds of critical acclaim, made Neil Gaiman famous, really. And from that, he launched a career as not just a comic book writer, but a fantasy novelist, writing, among other things, American Gods. And now he's considered one of the foremost fantasy novelists, maybe one of the foremost popular novelists working today. Anyhow, Sandman was not about the Golden Age superhero that wore a gas mask. It was about this mysterious, immortal entity, Morpheus, the god of dreams. And it introduced this whole pantheon of archetypes, of spirit beings that had been around since before the dawn of time, exercising influence over humanity. One of the principal supporting characters was his sister, Death. And this stuff, very complex, very layered, and very, very surreal. In fact, it had a dream-like quality to it. So this stuff, Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman especially, and also Grant Morrison, Alan Grant, some of the best stuff being produced in comic books in the late 80s and into the early 90s. Now, from the success of Sandman, DC, once they had the Vertigo imprint, which started in 1993, that's the mature audiences only, launched a second book with Sandman in the title, this one about the Golden Age superhero with the gas mask, Sandman Mystery Theater. It was written by Matt Wagner, who's the guy that did the long-running independent comic about the assassin Grendel. And it was a noir. It was a very dark noir story. Well, noir, of course, meaning black or dark, set during the 1930s and 1940s. Well, now let's look at what else was going on at DC at the time. And we're going to start by talking about a couple of different team books that were new versions of teams that had been around at DC Comics circa 1960 and hadn't really been used much, if any at all, since then. So we'll start with the Suicide Squad, which debuted at DC, I think in the pages of The Brave and the Bold, way back in 1959, before even the Justice League, and only ran for a short time. Well, the concept was revisited in 1987 by the writer John Ostrander, who had an independent series that he did with Tim Truman called Grimjack. He also wrote the some of those Marvel westerns, the more modern versions of those. Anyway, the Suicide Squad, the idea is, it is a group of mostly criminals who are now working for the U.S. government in place of being sent to prison. So they have to serve the government, and they have to go on these highly dangerous missions, which might be suicide missions. And occasionally characters get killed off in this title. So the old 1959 version notwithstanding, this one is the one that really is the modern incarnation, and is the one that introduces, well, it doesn't introduce, but it uses some of the characters that later would become familiar to film audiences. And, very much, again, kind of a dark approach. A little less dark was the Doom Patrol. Doesn't sound less dark, does it? This also was a team that was introduced in the early 1960s and didn't have a very long run. That was reintroduced in 1987, but then that title was taken over in 1989 by Grant Morrison, who brought his very unique and surreal sensibilities to it. Well, speaking of unique and surreal, also in 1989, you had Gotham by Gaslight, which was the first of what would be known as Elseworlds stories, imaginary stories, if you will, that don't take place inside the DC universe or in regular DC continuity. Again, theoretically, the Crisis on Infinite Earths had ended all that, so this stuff isn't meant to be taken as actually happening, except that later on, a lot of it did get incorporated when the multiverse was brought back. Spoiler alert, in 2007, in another miniseries called Final Crisis. And now all these various locales are considered to be different versions of Earth. But this first one was a Batman story set in late 1800s London. So Batman is a British detective trying to catch Jack the Ripper. Well, over at Marvel, let's take a look at some of the things that are going on. For one thing, now 1990, that's what I consider the transitional period when that very brief Dark Ages transitioned out and a new age was starting, but it's right on the cusp of it. Now, a lot of people will say the Dark Ages lasted until 1993 or 94. I will explain again why I don't agree with that. But 1990 is close enough to count for what we're talking about. There was a whole new team, an informal team by Marvel comprised of a lot of the old horror characters from the 70s. So you had Ghost Rider, which the original Ghost Rider has been cured of his curse, Johnny Blaze, and now there's a new one, Danny Ketch, and then there's a second title, Spirits of Vengeance, which has the new Ghost Rider and the old Ghost Rider, who's still a tough guy. And then you've also got Morbius, the Living Vampire, and Blade, the Vampire Hunter, and so forth, and you've got them working together in these horror stories. Another thing that you started to see more of in the late 80s and especially by the early 90s was at Marvel these three characters showing up absolutely everywhere. Showing up in one another's books, but showing up in everybody's books as a way to increase sales, because these were the three most popular characters at Marvel circa 1990. There had been a resurgence of popularity of Spider-Man and Wolverine and the Punisher. Remember, this was the age of the anti-hero. All right, well, I mentioned briefly Todd McFarlane once before as one of the up-and-coming popular artists. His run on Amazing Spider-Man was what put him firmly in that firmament. Todd McFarlane's style was very unique. It had a lot of line work, a lot of detail, and a lot of flow. And it was he who introduced Venom as the artist, with writer David Michelinie. But he introduced the look of Venom, Spider-Man's black alien suit that has taken over the body of this guy that really hates Peter Parker and now becomes an arch enemy. Anyway, Todd McFarlane, within a short time, the early issues of Amazing Spider-Man he did, especially the first few appearances of Venom, just became highly, highly sought after. And he became sort of an instant celebrity. Now, I was talking about the crossovers and guest stars and everything. In the pages of Fantastic Four in 1991, for a brief time, the team was replaced by what were then four of the most popular characters, right? The Fantastic Four becomes Spider-Man, Grey Hulk, Wolverine, and Ghost Rider. Other than Spider-Man, that is a dark and gritty bunch. Back at DC, in the middle of all this darkness and grittiness, in the pages of Justice League, which was no longer called Justice League of America, it was restarted with issue 1, just plain Justice League, because some of them aren't Americans. Some of them aren't even from Earth. Anyway, this was a very, very light-hearted book. I mean, there were serious moments written by Keith Giffen and J.M. DeMatteis. And this is where Blue Beetle and Booster Gold shone with their sort of comedy relief. And here's just a couple of sample panels to show you the kind of thing that I'm talking about. And this made Justice League very, very popular for a while in the late 80s, popular and successful. But do you know what really, really brought a lot of attention to DC Comics in the late 80s? The movie Batman, directed by Tim Burton and starring Michael Keaton, with Jack Nicholson as the Joker. If you weren't around then, it's hard to imagine the anticipation that this movie provoked and the extraordinary popularity of it. Sort of really captured the dark and mysterious feel of the Batman. And also led, again, just like the TV series had, well, the TV series didn't lead to this change, but it sort of cemented it, another change to the appearance of Batman. Michael Keaton's Batman, his suit, other than the yellow parts, was all black, as opposed to being gray with blue accoutrements, right? So since then, frequently, not always, but frequently, Batman has been portrayed in the comics as mostly or all black, so far as his uniform was concerned. All right, well, Vertigo, like I said, that came about in 1993, which, according to my timeline, was after the end of the Dark Age. But a lot of the groundwork for it was laid by the darkness that permeated comics tonally in the late 80s. So this is that imprint I've been talking about over and over again. That was for mature audiences only. No Comics Code Authority, no stamp on this. Sold only in comics shops, although by this time a good 75% of comics were sold in comics shops, with the others being either in subscriptions or just a handful of newsstands and supermarkets and so forth. So anyway, several significant graphic novels and or series such as Y, The Last Man, Transmetropolitan, History of Violence, V for Vendetta by Alan Moore, Preacher by Garth Ennis, which was very bizarre. Garth Ennis became something of a celebrity writer. And of course, Sandman. So that was the really good stuff that you were seeing from Vertigo in the 1990s. But a good deal of what you started seeing by the early 1990s, after the dark wave had begun to pass, wasn't that great.